And welcome to another episode of This Uncanny Earth. I'm your co host, Robert Solomon, and my other two co hosts are here as well, Stephen and Spider. And Stephen, tonight is your show, so take it away.
All right. I actually have a photo for us tonight. So let me get this up on screen for us real quick. Uh, there it is, share screen. I'm going to share this tab over here real quick. All right. So this right here on the right hand side, his name is Philip Elsford. Now, do you have any questions before I tell you more about him? Either one of you.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Philip was an aristocratic Englishman living in the middle 1600s at the time of Oliver Cromwell. He had been a supporter of the king and was a Catholic. He was married to a beautiful but cold and frigid wife, Dorothea, the daughter of a neighboring nobleman. One day, when out riding on the boundaries of his estates, Philip came across a gypsy encampment and saw there a beautiful dark-eyed girl, raven-haired gypsy girl, Margot, and fell instantly in love with her. He brought her back secretly to live in the gatehouse, near the stables of Diddington Manor. Great manor, by the way, Diddington. It was his family home. So, For some time, he kept his love nest secret, for obvious reasons, but eventually Dorothea, realizing he was keeping someone else there, found Margot, and accused her of witchcraft and stealing her husband. Philip was too scared of losing his reputation and his possessions to protest at the trial of Margot, and she was convicted of witchcraft and burned at the stake. Philip was subsequently stricken with remorse that he had not tried to defend Margot and used to pace the battlements of Diddington in despair. Finally, one morning, his body was found at the bottom of the battlements, whence he had cast himself in a fit of agony and remorse. And this is where our story begins. What do you guys think? Do you think Philip sounds like an interesting person?
I like your acting so far. I think that was fantastic. I have a feeling there's going to be a twist involved here. So,
Yes.
yes, I feel like Philip is an interesting person. Or is he?
Spider, what about you?
I'm just waiting for that shoe to drop.
Oh, you mean how he's not real? Yep. See, they were gonna do seances for Philip, but the problem is he's not real. They made him up. He's a tulpa, essentially. But he's also a ghost because, he died in the well. So is he a tulpa or is he a ghost? Let's get your thoughts. Let's go ahead and start with you, Rob. What do you think?
So, was he a person at all before? Like, was he ever a real person?
Nope.
So he was just
Completely. Yes.
fictitious from the start.
And they even made up the. So let me go ahead and tell you guys this real quick. Right here, he was actually created by these researchers at a psychical research institute under the guidance of Dr. A.R.G. Owen. They had assembled a group of 8 people, none of whom claimed to have any psychic gifts. The group became known as the Owen Group, and it consisted of Dr. Owen's wife, a woman who was the former chairperson of Mensa, an industrial designer, an accountant, a housewife, a bookkeeper, and a sociology student. A psychologist named Dr. Joel Witten also attended many of the sessions as an observer. Philip Elsford. But no, he never existed in the real world. They created this very rich and intriguing story of Philip so that they could get the visual of Philip in their mind, and they would sit around and they would focus on the idea of Philip and his story, and they would focus on his adventures and what they thought he might have done. And this is essentially the very source of tulpamancy. They were essentially participating in tulpamancy. So what do you think about that?
I mean, they've measured when people get together and pray, they've measured the energy that comes off of
Yep.
prayer,
And the
and
Human
there's
Consciousness
a
Project.
substantial amount of energy that is released. But we also look at Shaolin monks that can go through tremendous amounts of pain, people that lay on beds of nails, people that walk over hot coals, a lot of mind over matter type stuff. So
Yeah.
it's not too far fetched to not necessarily create a living entity, but believe it so much that you can get other people to believe that it exists as well in more of a psychological aspect.
So you're like brainwashing people, essentially.
Yes, essentially, you're just sort of pulling the wool over their eyes, as it were. If you
Yeah,
tell somebody something exists long enough, people will start to believe it.
I can see that. And what do you think about all this, Spider?
I have some lengthy thoughts that I'm going to introduce after I ask you to explain the course of the experiment. I would like everybody to hear, after they created this persona, what all happened during the seances and all that other kind of stuff. I'd like to hear about
Yeah.
all that before I make a minor hijack of your show.
Okay, so we have two options here. I can tell you about all that, or I could show a YouTube video, but I don't know if it would qualify for fair use since it's educational. So,
Explain it and put the video in the comments.
okay. Let me pull it up real quick. It is in my history. It is an old recording of an old VHS of the Philip Ellsford experiment, and they actually did reviews with the people who were here. It says a rare and, as far as we know, delisted documentary from a TV show called Extra Special People in 1974, discussing deeper details of the experiment. So I'm grabbing the link right now. Here we go.
So it's not quite public domain yet, so it's still murky on the copyright.
Yeah.
Because public domain would be about after 70 years, and that's
Yeah.
roughly about 50 some.
So if people want to go check that out, I just posted that in the comments. And it is basically like an old documentary / interview with some of the people. And they actually show the table moving. They started performing seances, and they actually show the table moving. And I know they can do camera tricks, but it's pretty intriguing how they do it, because they all have their hands on the top of the table, and they're all standing up, so they can't be lifting it with their legs, obviously, because they're standing up, and they all have their hands on top of the table, yet somehow it starts like levitating and rocking all over the place. And they say it's hard to tell with the video, of course, because it's old and grainy, but the claims are that multiple witnesses say that the table moved in ways that they believed that the people would not have been able to manipulate it. So yeah, go ahead.
So on one hand, the people involved in the experiment see the experiment as successful after a fashion. Whereas, what was the critical reception of all that? What did people think about that after the fact?
Well, most people these days look at it as, completely fictitious and, just make a mockery of it. But they tend to do that with most things related to the paranormal, I feel like. So it's kind of murky, I'll be honest. It's very murky from my personal opinion.
Well, I have an interesting bit of a rabbit hole for you.
All right.
And it starts with the Book of Enoch.
Ooh, interesting.
Which I know will grab some attention from a couple of people in here. In one of the earlier Greek translations of the Book of Enoch, there's a term called an egregore. Now, this term was meant to refer to the Watchers, and we've talked about them extensively on the show. We've talked about Watchers, Nephilim, etc., etc. Later on, when the Greek mystery schools started cropping up, and they had little secret societies and things, they, instead of attaching it specifically to the Watchers from the Book of Enoch, it was instead used for anyone who was quote-unquote watchful, which were people who, in the secret societies, who watched the rest of civilization in a sort of Illuminati kind of way. Eventually, the term egregore evolved to a more modern sense where it is today. Today, in left-hand path philosophy, an egregore is a force or even an entity of some kind that an individual or a collective of individuals has brought into being themselves, not alive, not as a physical thing,
Like a
but
tulpa,
as sort of like a representation of something that they're trying to accomplish.
an AI. It's a
Sort of.
conspiracy theory I've seen
The,
floating around.
the way that left-hand path people use these is that a good number of people on that side don't actually believe that there's demons or angels or deities or whatever, but they do need something to focus their minds on. If you're going to be doing something of a spiritual nature, you have to have a spiritual object, not necessarily a physical object, but a point of reference. You have to
Like
convince
mental?
your mind to open up to something spiritual. Otherwise, you're an atheist, and if you're an atheist, then why are you doing ritual stuff to begin with? You don't believe in any of that. So if you're trying to be in
Funsies.
that halfway point, then you craft these egregores, which are fueled by various emotions or various whatever. And again, you can debate whether it's a real thing or not. The trick that a lot of left-hand people use is that you create it for your purpose, and once your purpose is done, it just dissolves, it goes away. But we also know, based on various bits of evidence, that when people believe in certain things like Ouija boards and other sort of things like that, they can create mental attachments for themselves. And again, it's debatable. Are these real demonic beings? Are they real spiritual things that are out to harm you? We don't know for sure, but they could be. And they're brought into existence by the power of thought, by mental willpower. And this parallels other things we've talked about. As Rob mentioned, the power of prayer. When you get enough people who are true believers together, pretty miraculous things can happen. And you're going to get other people who say, oh, well, what if 1 million people prayed for $1 million and they don't get it? What's that going to be all about? Well, that's because maybe they didn't actually believe in the $1 million. They just wanted a bunch of money. It's the strength of the core values,
the core belief, right?
The core beliefs, the core. You have to really be in it. You have to really be faithful to it.
Not most of the way, not 99%, 100%.
That's why faith is not pigeonholed into one thing. When people hear the word faith, they think, oh, well, you have to be going to church and you have to be faithful. Not necessarily. I have faith that, as I've mentioned before, that the air is going to be clean enough for me to breathe. I have faith that my stuff around my house is going to work as it's supposed to. I don't know for sure that it's going to, but I have to believe that it does. Is it going to affect it if I don't believe it? If I believe that my laptop is going to be broken tomorrow, please don't say that, that it'll actually break tomorrow?
It might.
Theoretically, I could bring that
don't
into
talk
existence.
about it.
And so this experiment is interesting because there is a lot of real world philosophical thought about things like that. This was a clinical approach to it, where they methodically built a being and they told everybody, this is who this person was. We want you to focus on them and all that, as opposed to just coming up with an idea and using it for whatever you were planning on using it for. So again, I think it illustrates that there is power in thought, and there are things that we can bring into being that could, whether they're actually thinking, feeling creatures, they will certainly act like it. And so if you're getting into that kind of thing, you have to be very careful, because you could definitely create something that's going to turn into a hex or a curse, so to speak, that's going to torment you, and it's going to become a mental illness. And that's what happens to many people who get into some of these things. They start, like the Ouija board thing, or even some of the cursed dolls, I think, in the museums. I think a lot of the cursed dolls have this thing about them that once you let the thought in that, oh, I've said something mean about Robert the Doll, is he gonna come get me? No,
It's a
absolutely not.
self-fulfilling
But you let it
prophecy.
open. You left it open in your mind, and now some part of your mental energy is going to be focused on, oh, something bad's going to happen to me, and then it does.
Yep. Rob, did you have anything to add?
I think sometimes it's not so much of you're creating something that's already existed, and you're just opening a doorway for it to come out.
Like a
Um,
frequency?
Frequency, some form of
Yep.
demonic entity, some form of otherworldly entity that is like, okay, now I got an entryway into wherever it is you're doing. So you're almost made to feel like this thing is something you created when I think it's something that's been in existence um, for a long time. And you're just giving it a pathway into whatever reality that you are in.
Yep. Now, I think it's very interesting that Spider brought up egregores because, as I kind of got excited about a second ago, I've seen a conspiracy theory floating around lately saying that AI are egregores, and the way he explained it, maybe not like monsters or anything like that, or supernatural entities, but maybe they are in a alchemical sense, in a way that you are encoding your own beliefs, your own mission, your own spirituality into an AI when you speak to it. You're basically training it as a mirrored version, a recursion of yourself. And in doing so, you're creating your own tulpa or egregore by giving it its own personality, its own belief system, and all this other stuff. You're kind of essentially creating a tulpa of your very own.
There's a subsect of left hand path thought that I've never fully really bought into, because a lot of the people who get into it are basically true atheist people who like to just mess around with everybody. The chaos magic concept, where anything can be magical. I drink my tea and my tea is magical because it's magical tea, and it's
That's placebo effect.
various things. Well, they don't do that for themselves. They do that for other people.
Yeah.
They do that to make other people wonder, oh, is that magic? Is that, or to freak them out? Like, what are you doing? You're talking crazy.
I
And
did that earlier.
they have embraced technology, especially the internet, within the framework of that. And so they're 100% in on, whether they actually believe it or not, who knows, but they 100% push the thought that, oh yeah, you create AI and instantly you've created a god, and you've created this and you've created that, and all the demons and everything is all technological,
It's much
whatever.
more complicated than that.
There's a lot more to it. Yeah. I stay on the outside of that bubble, because most of the people, not all of them, most of the people that are into that kind of sphere are either attempting to troll you on purpose, or they're a little out there themselves. And so it's very difficult to be in that kind of group mindset without falling into one of those traps. I have talked with some people who are pretty level-headed about it, but they're very, very, very rare. The whole thing is kind of an absurdist concept, and that's how most of them view it. That it's an advanced version of how LaVey originally created the Church of Satan as a mockery of the Catholic Church, and it wasn't meant to be some big thing. It was just supposed to be making fun of the church, and then people bought into it, so he went into it further and leaned into it with the costumes and everything, and it became a big thing now. Now people are honestly like, oh yes, we believe in Satan and this and that, and this. He really didn't believe in Satan either at the time. He was just making a joke that caught on, and he went with the joke. And so a lot of people
Bought into it
in the chaos magic, quote unquote, mindset are of the same feeling. They do the same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I can't say that I'm super, super knowledgeable about some of that, because there are some rabbit holes I try not to get too deep into, because you can either just irritate yourself, frustrate yourself, or you can get stuck in some of those things, and then you're running yourself ragged with things that may or may not be.
Not to derail the show too much, but I would like to add on to that there is some science to support that, I believe. Like guys mentioned a minute ago, placebo effect, the observer effect,
Mhm.
the human consciousness project, and a few other things. I regardless of the chaos magic, I don't know if I believe in all that necessarily, but I do 100% the law of attraction is another one. I do definitely believe that our thoughts can interact with reality, but I don't believe it's on an individual level so much as it's on a global consciousness level. Like the majority of humanity believes in something, boom, it becomes reality. Not instantaneously, but slowly over time, things will just occur like a domino effect until the majority of what people believe becomes the truth. Okay. Now, back on with the Philip experiment. So they started doing these seances in 1972, and they basically gave their informal gatherings, and they would just sit around and talk about Philip and think about his adventures, but not much happened. And then they changed their tactics, and that was when they started doing the seances like a classic spiritualist seance, where they would put their hands on the table and say, are you here, Philip? And they would do the knocking on the table. One rap for yes, two for no. They knew it was Philip because, well, they asked him, and that was their logic. That was literally their logic. And from there, it just took off from there, and they continued their communication. They kept getting answers, and at times the table would even dance on one leg, like wobble back and forth. And so, it was just really interesting. But sorry, he was a creation of their collective imagination, and it was very evident in his limitations. Pretty much all he could do was knock on stuff. And eventually they decided to try it again with a completely different group of people and a new fictional character. After just 5 months, they established contact with their new ghost, Lilith, a French Canadian spy, and they had other similar uh, experiments where they conjured up such entities as Sebastian, a medieval alchemist, and even Axel, a man from the future. All of them were completely fictional, yet all produced unexplained communication through their raps. So the basic thing we're asking here is, what do you think? Are they credible? Incredible? Do you think they're really happened? Or do you think they're just making all this up to get people to watch their show?
Um,
Because that was,
what
like
I
the Fox sisters. So
what
it
I
was.
find interesting is that when they initially didn't have the lights dimmed and they didn't have the candles lit and they didn't do any of the typical seance things, and they thought, oh yeah, let's try to communicate with this being that we've created, that they didn't have any results to speak of. And then they changed the atmosphere, which changed their perceptions,
Mhm.
which changed their expectations. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I think it less became that they actually conjured something, and I think more that they expected something. And I think, regardless of whether they say we didn't move the table, there's evidence that we didn't move it, that we
Yeah.
didn't dance up, I
They could have
think
done it subconsciously.
there was some human interaction with that. And so, while I believe that potentially these things can be done in the right mental circumstances, I think the experiments were too inconclusive, because part of it again is once you introduce theater, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Again, that's why left hand path people who don't usually believe in actual magical things or whatever, but they do believe in mental abilities.
Yeah.
They introduce costumes, they introduce chants, they introduce the atmosphere, because it's a way to convince yourself that this is really going to work, whether you believe it or not. So, and I think that's where I have to kind of wonder about it, and think it wasn't quite what they meant to do, but it was ambitious. I'll say
Yeah.
that.
What do you think, Rob?
So, like I said, I hearken back to my theory that they are dealing with something that is just looking for a way in, is looking for a way to get past whatever barrier they've put in front of it, and it
Yeah.
says, okay, now you've given me a way in. Um, Especially changing things up. Obviously, too, it could be all mind over matter situations where they're allowing themselves to succumb to this, because we're all taught, dim the lights for ghost
Yeah.
stories, or nobody tells the ghost story with all the lights in the house on. You're dimming lights, you're setting a mood, you're setting an atmosphere, and when you set that atmosphere you expect certain results from said atmosphere. It's not like they were standing in a outside in the middle of the day over a picnic and doing these things, right? Because then it's you got everything going on. But now they're in a room, they've dimmed the lights, there's candles, they're holding seances. They already know the preconceived concept of what a seance does.
Mhm.
So you're just introducing something that's already known. Take people that don't know what seances are and put them in that room, that never heard of a seance, never knew what a seance was. Just say, hey, you're just going to be talking to yourself
But
for
tell
so
them
many
the
minutes.
story of the fictional character.
You could do that, sure, or you could just see if what happens when they talk to themselves. Say, yeah, there's a pretend like there's a guy named Philip here,
Yeah.
and see what happens, and see if it produces the same results. These are the things I need to know. Like in a controlled experiment, you want all variables present.
Yeah.
So obviously you couldn't do that in this day and age because most people know what seances are, and most people are familiar with candle magic and things like that. So most people would be you'd be hard pressed outside of maybe an Aboriginal tribe, but they have their own superstitions and they have their own thoughts and feelings on fire and darkness and things like that, because that stems from a deep seated place of our ancestors had to deal with scary things in the dark. So you would be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't know about the dark or magic, or somebody that's lived in a sheltered existence, and that'd be like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is one or two people out there, but once again, it depends on your sample size too. Because if you have people that are into witchcraft or know about witchcraft or know about religious aspects and what candles do and some of the things that they hold, they're already going into it with the preconceived notion that this happens when we put these things together. It's not like they're going in there and they're like, well, we don't know what's going to happen, because we've all seen movies, we've all seen things like The
Yeah.
Exorcist, and we've all seen horror movies where there's a haunting or a poltergeist of some form or fashion. So we already have that ingrained in our head, right? Of when you go into this, and then like Spider said, when you had the theatrics involved, then you're just really putting on a show. But who's that show for? Is it to bring this out, or is it for you to be more of a believer? Like I said, you don't see people sitting around in a on a picnic table out in the middle of the day on a 90-degree day in the summer doing these kinds of things. It's
Yeah.
always at a certain time, in a certain place, under certain daylight conditions. Usually there isn't any daylight, it's very dark, like pitch black. And studies have shown that if certain senses are dimmed or removed, like the their barometric chamber that they have where they put people in, and if you stay in there for so long you win so much money, and or one of the tanks where it's pitch black, can't see your hand in front of your face,
And
your
they
mind
go
will make up
crazy.
images. Your brain will make up images
Yeah.
to replace, because you're losing that sense of sight. So I think a lot of the times it's just your heightening senses. Could it be they've made up something? I actually, obviously I can't say 100% sure that they couldn't have, but for me, it seems like it's something that's either A, already there, that's just looking for a way in, or B, all their preconceived notions are just causing them to be in that state of awareness.
And it's interesting that you mentioned, dark rooms and candles, which are common for seances, because in that video I sent earlier, there actually is a scene where they do the seance in the middle of the studio with the lights on. And it's still, the table still rocks back and forth. But like I said earlier, it's very difficult to tell, even when watching the video, for one, because it's grainy, and for two, because of the angle, obviously. But it's very difficult to tell whether or not they're rocking the table like that or not. you know. So it's very up in the air,
And if
you
you
know.
don't have multiple camera angles,
Yeah.
you know, obviously you're gonna, you want to be a skeptic first because
Yeah.
bold claims
And this
require
was back in
bold
the
proof.
70s.
Exactly. So unless you had a camera at the ankles, you had a camera, at their waist, so you could see if somebody's moving their knees
Yeah.
or
Well,
somebody had their
they
fingers
were
pressing up
standing,
on it.
so it would have been difficult, but not impossible.
Right, right. And I think too, camera tricks are a lot easier,
Yeah.
back then because you didn't have to have a camera on every single part. Nowadays, I mean, you could use CGI and things like that and movie magic, and who knows? A lot of time, that's what a lot of that stuff is.
Yeah.
Star Wars, for instance, they were in a small room, but it looks like they're in this vast galaxy having these large fights. So, once again, that could have been another parlor trick, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to get some notoriety. We're just see if we could trick some people, like you said earlier. A good point. The Fox sisters, kind
Yeah.
of the same basic premise, but without all the hysteria.
And it's also another interesting thing that I was thinking about while we've been talking about this is there actually was a story of these 20 or 30 Tibetan monks that actually sat down and meditated on an entity until it actually came to life. And it was a friar, like an old friar, Friar, And I forgot what they named it, but it actually walked around like physically, like they could touch it, like you or me. And it walked around with them, it would hang out with them. But then over time, they lost their focus and it just kind of faded away. And I thought that was a very interesting story to hear about that. So what do you think about that? Do you think that would be possible, or do you still think that it wouldn't be possible? Like, I'm talking like actual ancient monks that study this for decades.
My my
Like,
concern with
yeah,
this is, what proof is there? Proof that this happened, like visible physical
no,
proof?
it's just a story.
Because we could all get
Yeah,
together and make up the same story
yeah,
and say we've been training for 20 years on how to create a scary man or a slenderman, right?
yeah.
And then we could all sit here today like, yeah, we touched him, we held his hand, we played tiddlywinks, we skipped jump rope, we played foursquare, we did hopscotch.
We murdered our friends to get into his mansion.
But if we don't have physical proof, it's one of those things. It's one of those things that's like, if it's true good to be true, then it probably is. Because we don't know
Yeah,
if they made this up for, to because a lot of times monks have these grandiose myths that, you know, revolve around them. The Shaolin monks are one of the most tightly knit groups, and they do these feats of strength, which, I've seen. That's the kind of stuff I've seen. You
yeah,
know, they train their bodies in a certain way to where they can do these feats of strength, right? They understand how the body works. They're able to manipulate the body to do
the mind.
those things. And yeah, and like I said, I don't believe it personally, because I like, while manipulating the body is something that we all do, right?
Yeah,
Look at a bodybuilder that can bench press 300, 400 pounds. Most people can't do that, but he's
breathing is
trained
important.
himself enough to do that. He's not just creating something out of thin air. He's building up his strength to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Now, am I saying that it's 100% impossible? No, because I can't. You can't say anything with 100% certainty
yeah,
in that regard. But for me, and this is, no offense to anybody that believes it, but I can't buy into it because there's no
yeah.
physical proof. And
That's fair.
if there was more cases where this was a possibility, I could see it. But if you give me like three examples and they're all from the same temple, or they're from temples that sort of are in radius, I have to wonder if they're just sort of pushing that to say, look what we can do. We're a secret
Yeah.
sect of monks that can make things happen. If that's the case, why haven't more people done it?
Because it takes decades of practice. Now, I'm not saying that I 100% believe in it either. I'm saying I like the idea, as people say, and
Fair enough.
I'm not
Fair enough.
ruling it out entirely. I'm not ruling it out entirely because I have seen the placebo effect, human consciousness, and how powerful the mind is, including the law of attraction. And I understand that the observer effect, now correct me if you know better than I do, but my understanding is that part of the way the observer effect works is that our observation collapses the waveform into a single possibility. It is basically, string theory. It could be any of millions of possibilities, but as we focus on one particular possibility, we collapse the waveform into a single outcome, at which point it becomes our reality because it goes back in time to make a decision based on what we are thinking about.
I think the only way you could really prove that, you have to have somebody from the outside. You
Yeah.
have to have somebody that's completely oblivious to how they train, right? Completely oblivious to their routines and their diets, because if they're eating, and this is something we need to consider, if they're consuming a certain thing, right?
Rocks.
Say that certain thing has chemicals or it interacts, with their physiology, causing them to hallucinate. I could see that being more of an accepted reality, because when you
They're
take
all on it.
certain psychedelics, things seem real that aren't. Walls breathe, or you see little
Yeah.
people, or you touch things and they feel different. They feel real to you. Once again, if whatever they're consuming, that could also play a big part in that. So you would need somebody that's not on any of that, that is from a whole nother country. Like, if you're talking about a Shaolin monk, or you're talking
Yeah.
about, you'd need somebody from the United States. You need somebody like a scientist, or somebody with some reputation behind them, to go over there and say, I've seen this. Or a group, really a group of people. But then they could play off the effect of, well, that person brought the wrong energy in, it disrupted our focus, so we couldn't make it happen. So it's a consistent our
Yeah.
word against your word type of situation.
Yeah. What do you think, Spider?
The other part of that is anytime you're dealing with observations of a minority group of people versus the observations of a majority group of people,
Nobody's
the
going to
trick
listen to the
is,
majority.
well, it's not a matter of saying things, it's a matter of what their beliefs already are. When you come out with something that, here's this thing that's real to us, if they're already kind of on an area where, if the majority is in an area where, oh, well, that stuff has never existed before, we don't believe in that, they're not going to see anything. It's going to take an extraordinary amount of mental effort for something that's believed on a small scale to become evident in reality to a large scale. And that's why we have a lot of people resistant to how different sciences are perceived, how different spiritualities are perceived, because regardless of whether we like it or not, the majority dictates what's reality and what isn't, for the most part, because there are more of them and there's more minds connected with that,
Yes.
believing that fact.
That's the interaction with the hyperbits that I always rant about.
On a smaller scale, we witnessed this without going into detail and making people upset. We witnessed this between 2020 and 2023. You had different groups of people of different mindsets over a certain topic. Again, we're not going to mention any of it, and I don't want to make anybody upset. But that perceived how various people around the world saw how to react to certain situations and certain events. And we couldn't wrap our heads around, why would you choose this and still everything worked out great for you? We chose this, it worked out great for us, and it was supposed to work out bad for you, and it's supposed to work out bad for us, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's competing belief systems. There was enough people on both sides of that issue that no side ended up right,
Yep.
which is an interesting consequence. And it doesn't always work out that way. A lot of times it's just whatever the majority believes in, that's what becomes the majority thought. That's why many of the larger religions have become as large as they are. That's why Catholicism got to be as large as it was during the time that it was the leading form of Christianity because they violently made sure that they were number one. And when people believed it, it doesn't matter if they were scared into believing it, they had to. They were, all that fear just fed into it. The fear became part of the belief and it made them stronger. But it's also why they're kind of weaker now compared to a lot of the Protestant religions and compared to Islam, which is its own thing in an entirely different part of the world. So, it's cultural, but it's also, again, just the more people who believe a thing is a thing, the more that thing is going to be that thing.
Yeah. And we have someone in the comments asking if we believe in angels. Would you like to answer that one, Rob, Spider, either one of you?
So, not in the sense of like a lot of people, they're basically different entities. So the Malachim, the Ophanim, things like that. Not necessarily the term angels, but more messengers of God. I believe in them. Yes, I believe they're encamped around you. They watch your back. They look out for you. Um, but only in the sense of like they look like us, not with the ones with the wings and all that. I believe a lot of that is art, that they've come out with. But yes, I do. As far as talking to them, I don't think people can talk to them in the same sense that we are sitting here having a conversation. But do I think you can interact with them? Yes. I feel like they are in everyday walks of life. And some people have met people that just don't quite make sense. They have a different aura about them. They have a different feel about them. And you usually only see those people once. Then you never see them for the rest of your life. But they have a different feeling about them. And yes, I definitely believe in angels, just not in the same term of like flying winged angels. That's me personally. Like I said, you take that for what it is, but that's what I believe.
Spider, would you feel comfortable answering that question?
Oh, I'm not against it. My particular outlook is not, I don't give power to certain ideas particularly. For me, it's kind of irrelevant, which is kind of dismissive. And I don't want people to think that I'm just dismissing the question like, oh, well, it doesn't even matter. Who cares? It's irrelevant to me because I'm not going to be interacting with beings on that level. Does a being like that potentially exist? Possibly. I haven't seen one. I've never spoken to one. I've never experienced anything that would convince me that there was one, but that doesn't mean in my limited experience that there isn't one. Same thing with most deific entities. That's why I'm not an atheist, because again, we're talking about the power of belief and we're talking about the power of how we observe the universe. And just because I haven't observed these things, it doesn't mean that they aren't real things somewhere out in that universe. They aren't real for me, but my views may be limited. My perceptions may be limited. I have to be humble enough to know that the way I see the world is not the way the world works. And I don't really feel too bad about that. Do I believe that there's angels in my life? No, not really. But as a concept, I can't discount it.
Yeah. Okay. I personally, it's complicated for me. I believe in angels, but not like Rob said, not necessarily as they are written about. I believe in them as a concept. Like if you, like he, like Rob said, if you've met someone really, really kind, like overly kind, and you don't even understand how they're so kind, like always giving, always in a good mood, no matter how bad their day is going, stuff like that. I think those are angels. I think it's more about the resonance, the frequencies, and the way that people live their lives as what makes them angels versus demons versus whatever else. And the other thing that I think is about everything that we've been discussing tonight with tulpamancy and all this is what if, between tulpamancy and the observer effect with science, what if every single, supernatural, religious, whatever, what if everything everyone believes, it's all true, but only in their world, because their world is interpreted through their senses, and everything that they see, touch, feel, hear, and taste and everything else is interpreted through their brain and gets filtered through their brain before they perceive how it is.
Now, the only thing I'm going to say to rebut that, because I 100% believe we all have our own particular universe, that this is how we see everything, and this is how it's displayed to us, and this is why we believe the things that we believe. It doesn't mean that can't affect someone else negatively.
Yes.
If you do something negligent. Like, if I believe that my neighbor is made out of pudding, and I go over there and start taking, like, trying to hack through him with a spoon and things.
Yes.
He's still, from his perspective, he's not made out of pudding. It sounds silly, but it's a real thing. I
love it.
What's going to happen is
he's going to call the cops.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't make me particularly evil, but it makes me disturbed. It makes me mentally not on the same wavelength as him. There's limits to how far out of bounds you can be in your personal views versus other people, regardless of how convinced you are. If you're so far out there that you can't interact with other people without harming them or without causing harm to yourself or something else, then I'm not saying you should be cured, because
you should probably just stay by yourself,
but you should be kept away from everybody else in some fashion. Do you deserve to be lonely because of that? No, not necessarily, but you are a danger to other people. And so it's an unfortunate side effect of the belief that we see the universe individually, but there has to be some sort of consensus on how these viewpoints interact with each other. There can't just be complete reckless disregard for how we interact and who we are and how we see fellow people. Otherwise, you have to go live on a mountaintop by yourself and live out what some people are going to say is delusions, and what you're going to say is your reality. So, it's a tough moral area. I don't want to say it's necessarily moral, because, again, I don't think people like who are divergent in that fashion are evil, because we all have our divergences. But it is a danger. And so
you got to be able to live with each other peacefully.
Or at least without
you have to remember that things have to still operate in a sense of uniform unity. There's universal laws and rules that can never be broken. That's just how it is. Whether you like it or not, that's just how it is. This isn't make believe. This isn't Candyland. Just because you think your neighbor's pudding, which is a wild concept if it were true.
I love it.
Because we live in creativity. Because we live in a set of rules, in a set of physics, in a set of laws that can't be broken. You can manipulate them
until we learn more about them.
You can manipulate them. I will give you that. They can be manipulated, but unless you have a gun that turns your neighbor into pudding, it's not just going to be pudding. It's just we
have a goal now. We have a scientific goal.
I'm sure there's a couple neighbors he would have loved to turn into pudding over his tenure there at his residence. But like I said, there's universal law, and universal law is universal law
until science surpasses it.
I think that's one of the few things that can't be surpassed. There's just certain things that are always going to be, if that makes sense. That's what I mean by universal laws. Okay, they exist above.
Oh, what about gravity? Because I would consider gravity to be a universal law. Would you agree with that?
No. Okay. Because gravity can be manipulated. If you ever take a magnet, how do those work, right?
Yeah.
And you suspend them between each other, you can sort of mess with that situation. Right?
So what about stealth?
Like, what do you mean?
Making something invisible through the refraction of light. Would that be a defying universal law of sight and visibility? No, because that's something, once again, that can be manipulated. Yeah.
If you wrap something in mirrors, which is, that's tiny mirrors, right?
Yeah.
the best way that I can describe universal law is there's certain, okay, like a person is a person, right? A person as we see it, the humanoid idea of a person, that won't change. You don't look at an animal and say that's a human being, right? Human beings are what we
Westworld.
are. We look like human beings. If it doesn't look like a human being, we don't consider it a human being.
What
That's
about
something
Westworld?
that always is. Are you talking like robot
Yeah,
style?
like synthetic.
You won't. Well, because you can still say it looks like a human being, right?
Yeah, that.
But once again, you're not going to look at a squirrel outside unless you're the guy that thinks your neighbor's pudding and say there goes a human being. You know what I mean? We have that set in stone of what a human being looks like. Even if somebody says, "Well, I think a squirrel's a human being," that's not the case. That's not something that everybody's all of a sudden going to adopt tomorrow, right?
That's why
So
the
that
uncanny valley disturbs us.
right. So it's those kind of things. If something looks like a person, like you said, Westworld, great example. Still looks like a human though, right?
Yeah,
Yul Brynner in Westworld,
that's
he
what I
was
was.
a robot.
That's
Still
what I
looks
was
like a
getting
human.
at. It looks
Right,
like a
right,
human, but it's not.
right. But we're going based off of looks,
Okay.
right? So like a cat, that's not a human. You're a human. He's a human. The neighbor next door that he thinks is pudding,
What about
human.
fish? Some fish look really human-like.
Oh, like the blobfish, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, the barber knows about the blobfish.
Yep.
But I think is that a pareidolia?
Could be.
Because we've seen other faces.
Yeah.
So, like you'll be outside looking at the raindrops and it makes a shape that looks like a face. I know we got way
Pareidolia
off topic about that.
Pareidolia is evidence of simulation theory. Okay, I'm done. Okay, any closing thoughts from either of you tonight?
I think the concept of this is interesting if it could be applied to helping people get over schizophrenia, or if they could help people sort of mentally check back in to society, because then it gives them an anchor.
Idea.
It's almost like the imaginary friend that a lot of kids had when they were children. This is Jim. He's my imaginary buddy. We play chess together, right? If you could anchor that to a person who has paranoid schizophrenia
An AI.
or a mental
Multiple
disorder,
AIs.
right, then you could sort of lead that person back into a healthier mindset.
I like it.
So I think that in that regard, it's interesting. But like this with the Philip experiment, I think it was a bunch of people trolling
Yeah.
to see if they could troll. Like, and people do this. People have done this. This is something that people are good at. They're good at trolling other people, right? That's just. But I think if used in the proper perspective, I feel like this could help a lot of people that have that mental. I don't want to say mental disability, but more of a. I don't want to say abnormal, but more of like a difference of mental states than a lot of us have, where we have friends. You two are friends, right? I can see you, right? And we can interact, and we can interact with the people around us, and we do quite well. Even if society is strange, we can still interact. But there's some people that can't. They physically cannot interact with other people, and I think this would be a great bridge to sort of close to span that gap between what
Yeah.
is and what isn't. That's my
Like,
opinion.
Learning
Thank
how
you, Luma.
to
Appreciate it.
learning
Luma.
how
Thank
to
you.
communicate with other people effectively.
Yes, exactly. Sort of put people back into society in a way that's healthy and can help them grow relationships.
I called
I
it
think that's-
persona.
Yeah.
Okay, Spider. Oh, sorry, not to cut you off, Rob. Did you have anything else?
No, that is all. Thank you.
Okay.
As a person who's done limited ritual work in the past with projecting concepts and projecting individuals, it's a fine line between imposing a thought out into the world and playing make believe. And it is very simple to convince yourself of a lot of things that are make believe, but to you, they're 100% real. And so we kind of have to be careful with that kind of thing. It's fun to dream up this kind of stuff, and it's fun to kind of believe that
believe.
every thought you have can create something, can manifest things. The whole manifested movement
Supported
is
by
a
science,
bit
though.
sure, and I'm not disregarding that. Like I said, I have done ritual work before, and I know personally things that have worked for me along those lines. But there are also a lot of people on the bandwagon for manifest this, do this, do this, your life will get instantly better,
No, it takes
who are
time.
not they're more trying to temporarily convince themselves of things as opposed to changing the way that their mind perceives things. And if you're going to be into it, you have to be into it. You have to have faith.
And you
There's
got to
no
work
other
at
word
it.
for it. You have to be faithful to it. You can't just fly by night, play around with it. Yes, it's good to do scientific experiments. It's good to bring science into things, to test things out. But at the end of the day, there's
Mental.
plenty of times where you just have to just take it on faith. You got no other choice because it's going to do what it's going to do with or without you. And you can just cause yourself harm by trying to force something or trying to disbelieve something that's just what it is. So,
All right, Rob, you gonna close this out?
Well, everyone, well, thank you for another episode of This Uncanny Earth, the popular paranormal podcast where everything is discussed. And tonight we discussed pretty much everything, from tulpas to ghosts. We've talked about tulpas before, we've talked about ghosts before. The idea of merging them is a very interesting conversation because we have to think to ourselves, are these things we've created, are these things that have already existed, but they're looking for a way back in because they haven't been given any thought or any feelings. Um, I do like the fact that you brought up this whole the monk aspect, of being able to touch something and being able to interject. Well, what are they eating? What is their diet? What is their meditation like? You know, are they the only ones that can see it? Because then that creates a whole series of issues. Next week we'll be back with some more amazing topics, and we hope you guys enjoyed the show as much as we did. I want to thank our audience for coming out. Luma, thank you for being here, asking some really good questions, and asked us if we believe in angels. I do. Spider is a little indifferent towards it, but he has his own thing, and so you gotta. That's something that most people have. They have their own thing, and you just have to understand that and move the best way you can with that. So, but anyways, that's all for me. That's all for my two co-hosts here. As always, people, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We will see all of you fine folks next week for another amazing episode. See you later.